I'm being joined by Debbie Deland. She's the president of the Florida Now organization, and we're learning a little bit about the bills that she supports or opposes and why. So, tell me a little bit about the Florida Now organization, how you got involved with it, and what their goals are.
I first got involved with Greater Orlando Now, and then was asked to be president of Florida Now, and Now stands for National Organization for Women. We are the largest grassroots civil rights organization focused on women's rights and women's equality. We work, our priorities, we have 6 pillars. We definitely right now have a priority on abortion, but we get involved. So we are definitely involved in reproductive rights, reproductive justice, economic justice, focusing on the pay gap, and now the Medicaid expansion ballot initiative. We are very much into supporting the LGBTQ community. And not that this is the last one, but we're very focused on violence against women, which is such a problem. It's amazing when you hear the percentages and between sexual assault and domestic violence, and violence in general against women, especially women of color. It's just terrible. So we really try to work on some of that. And I think that gives you an idea. We do protests and rallies, postcarding to get voters out there. We're very action-oriented. And Florida Now puts out, for example, digital action alerts, so we can get as many. We pick our top 5 priority bills and to support, and our top 5 to oppose, and then we work those with the legislature. And especially on all of them, we issue action alerts so that our members can weigh into their legislators on what position to take. Because not all the time are people real clear, or even legislators are real clear on how they should vote. Now, in my case, it's as a progressive. But we do a lot of that. We have a lobbyist that's superb. And we visit Tallahassee a couple times during session. We do a lot in terms of activism. We're not a service organization. We're an activism oriented type of group.
I think that's really interesting. I think a lot of political groups seem to be more geared towards spreading awareness or just talking about issues. And I think it's interesting that you're so action oriented. I think that's super important. So,
yeah, we just were involved in the successful drive to get the abortion ballot initiative, the number of signatures we needed to get that, which was incredible number, and we got over 1.4 million. But all over the state, the coalitions involved to deliver that under Floridians Protecting Freedom was superb. People worked so hard to deliver the volunteer petitions, because you have both paid petitions and volunteer petitions. But we're really proud that we had a significant contribution to that effort.
Yeah, that's awesome. 1.4 million signatures is a lot. And that's just in one state. That's not nationwide.
Right. This is just a law that's going to be on the ballot in Florida.
Wow.
A
Has that
change.
ballot?
It's not a law. It's a change to the Constitution, the Florida
Oh,
Constitution.
so that was signatures in support of doing a constitutional amendment?
Right.
Wow. What do you know what the verbiage of that amendment is?
Okay, this is the language. No law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability or when necessary to protect the patient's health, as determined by the patient's healthcare provider. This amendment does not change the legislature's constitutional authority to require notification to a parent or guardian before a minor has an abortion. That's all the wording is. It's not significant. It's simple, straightforward. It's been vetted. And now they have heard oral arguments in front of the state Supreme Court, the Florida Supreme Court. And what we're waiting to hear is whether they'll allow that language to be on the ballot. We think it's really a 50-50 bet because it's such a conservative DeSantis court, which is sad to say that they wouldn't act in relation to the law and they would act from a politics standpoint. But we're hoping the language is right in line with what can be a constitutional amendment. So we're hoping for the best. They don't have to rule. It's really weird that you get the language approved after you've gotten all the signatures. It's just crazy. It should be the other way around.
I agree.
Anyway, they have to rule by April 1.
So is this one of those situations where if they don't rule by April 1st, then it's automatically approved?
I don't think so. I think they have to rule.
Okay, I see. So I wonder what the consequences would be if they don't meet their April 1st deadline.
Oh, probably nothing. But I think they'll meet that deadline.
So that wording was very succinct. And I think that one of the problems that we have is that a lot of laws are 800 pages long, and it's really hard to understand all the moving parts. And sometimes maybe even in the same law, it can kind of contradict itself or be really, really open for interpretation. So I think it's really smart that you used such clear and concise wording to make sure that there wasn't a lot of room to misinterpret the law or to use it for purposes for which it wasn't intended.
Just let me clarify that I didn't do it. The Floridians Protecting Freedom Coalition did it, and they were the ones with Planned Parenthood, ACLU, and others that really worked the language and vetted it.
It seems like you're very connected to a lot of other organizations.
Absolutely, you have to be. And especially with these, there's an FPF coalition that's focused on this ballot initiative. There's the FRF, which is all the major reproductive rights organizations across Florida, so that they're working together with whether it's contraception, LGBTQ related issues. We have a Black caucus because things are so much worse for people of color when you talk about reproductive rights and reproductive justice. But there are a lot. We work with League of Women Voters. We work with Florida Rising. There are a whole ton of organizations out there.
So tell me a little bit about how you found out about the Digital Democracy Project and why you got involved.
I found out about the Digital Democracy Project from Sadie Holzmeyer coming to a meeting and explaining what it was. She's been terrific in explaining the Digital Democracy Project, helping people get on VOATS, which is the voting mechanism of the Digital Democracy Project, and learning how to vote. Not that it's very hard, because it isn't. I think the whole thing's pretty easy. But with some of my members, they're technology challenged. So you have to really be patient to get them up and working, as Sadie will tell you. But I heard about it from her, and I really liked the idea of being able to vote on the bills the legislators were going to be voting on and to put an opinion out before they voted. And then I loved the idea of holding them accountable to what the people wanted. So you could see the difference in how they voted versus how people voted. So now we're through the committee meetings. So we've done a lot on a lot of bills that have gone through the committees but may not make it to session. But now we're really into what bills are coming to the Senate or House floor.
Yeah, we're getting to the, I guess you could call it the end game. We're getting to the most important part.
Right. Now I really like the app, and I really have promoted it because I just think it has such potential. It doesn't have as much potential right now because you don't have enough people on it yet, but you will as you develop the base of people.
So when I was down in Florida, I had met a girl named Jessica, and we got talking about politics a little bit. And I told her about the app, and she was really supportive of what we were trying to do. And I made a point to her, which was, I think right now we have 1,030 users on the app. And it seems like that's not a lot of people, but that also means when you get in early at this stage, your voice will never carry more weight than it does right now. Because as more and more people get added, there's a larger averaging effect.
Right.
So when you get in early right now, your voice carries the most weight. So it's good to be an early adopter.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important that, you know, you had made the point that it's easy to use, and I think that was really part of the goal that that we were trying to get at. Was we want to make our politicians and our laws and our legislative system accessible to people and understandable, and we want them to be involved and give their opinions. And I think one of the barriers to that is that it's hard to know what's real. It's hard to know, you know, what people are saying and what people are doing. And, you know, it's hard to access bills and read them and know what the law is actually going to be. Sometimes they're buried in a little bit of legalese, for lack of a better term. And it feels hard to write your congressman a letter and things like that. So by introducing technology in this way, I think it gives an accessibility to not just the information, but to the people that are really important to the process.
Right.
So you said that you got really interested in climate change. What got you interested in climate change, and what did you want to do?
I got really interested in climate change, I think just in relation to all the bad news about it. And I read the book Limits to Growth, which came out in the 70s, that really said we were headed for trouble. And so I really thought I needed to give back. And I started a Cartridge World store to keep laser and ink cartridges out of the environment. It didn't work out in the long run, so I sold it. And that's when I went into looking more at sustainability and climate change. And I became a lead AP on homes and operations and maintenance.
So I think that's actually that's actually really cool. So you were trying to limit the use of the ink cartridges because of the plastics that they use and the amount of waste that they create for such a small amount of ink. I had read something a while back that they were talking about when we were complaining about how much gas had costed. They were like, you know, we're paying $4 for a gallon of gas, but let's put this into perspective. If you go to Starbucks every day, you pay like $60 a gallon for coffee. And they were talking about all these different fluids that we pay all this money for. And it turns out the most expensive fluid that we pay money for is printer ink. And if you buy it by the cartridge with just milliliters of ink in it, the gallon cost could get up to $60,000 a gallon.
Yep.
So
We knew
yeah,
it.
with that amount of cartridges going in the trash is definitely a problem. So
Right.
and I also feel like they use the cartridges themselves as a way to create a proprietary kind of walled garden
Yes.
approach to their business model. And it's
Mm-hmm.
more to protect a profitability over time model than it is to actually deliver an efficient product to the customer.
Absolutely.
So I it was an interesting point that you brought up that you felt like the people in Florida, or maybe you said Orlando, weren't focused on doing anything about climate change, which is weird to me because it seems like you guys are some of the most at-risk populations for climate change in the United States.
Well, more so on the coast, but the coasts aren't paying attention either. We're going to have this major move of people off the coast, and the people that are going to suffer are women and children the most, who don't have the money to move off the coast. The wealthy will be fine. The upper middle class will be fine because they can afford to go move somewhere else. But that's not true of disadvantaged populations.
I
So climate
completely agree.
change is a real issue for women and children in what we're working on too.
So, wow, that's a really interesting point. I think that a lot of people don't realize that climate change is an issue for people not just because we're changing the climate and the footprint of our cities and towns is going to change, but because of the mass migration that follows because of it. And I think you're absolutely right that it's the most vulnerable in the population that are going to have the least ability to move when it becomes dangerous or to just go and get a new place. It's not as easy as it sounds on paper.
Right, exactly. And most cities and towns are not planning for this mass migration. And the whole world, it's sort of scary because I think it's 70-80% of the people live on the coasts or close to the coast. And you're talking about major moves of people.
So, can you tell me about some of the other legislative priorities that you and your organization have?
Yeah, we had a high priority to support was the guardianship reform, which was and let me just look at this, to make changes to an incapacitated person will. You had to have a jury involved, increasing the transparency on required guardianship financial reports, family visitation rights. There's real abuse that goes on of elderly people, and a lot of those are women. And it it didn't go through. It's going to be revised and represented next year, but for its first year, because things don't go through necessarily in the first year. For its first year, it got quite great support. Rita Harris sponsored that one. Um, that one's one we would support. Let me give you one that we absolutely do not support, which is SB 476, provided by Grail, which is a civil liability case for abortion, where you would be allowed to sue for loss of that um, fetus. But they added an amendment to the bill which would have paved the way for personhood. In other words, calling that fetus an unborn child and a person, with all the rights that go associated with that. Um, because of the Alabama court ruling that stopped IVF in that state, um, they got nervous that this was not a bill that should go any further until there was a lot more investigation and hammering out. So they withdrew the bill, which is a major celebration for us because it stalls it one more year, and maybe we'll come up with something else to stall it next year. But that one, we worked hard and really fought to get that off the rails. And I think we had a great deal of impact, as did the Alabama court ruling. Back to victims of crime. When you have a sexual assault, they take your toxicology results, and then they can use it to prosecute the victim. If you have drugs in your system or alcohol or whatever. And I mean, when you go into court, the prosecutor can say, well, you were drunk or you were high or whatever. And those toxicology reports should be private. And
So the toxicology reports, they can be used to impugn the victim. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I see.
And charge the victim.
And so they can actually, presumably if they found marijuana in the person's system, they could be charged under some anti-drug law?
What we want to do is make it so that they can't prosecute the victim for certain offenses, and victims may have private counsel during the dispositions. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, we're really trying to make victims of sexual assault less victims, because they're so victimized by the whole legal process.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And, I guess it was always my impression that technically drug use isn't illegal. It's possession of drugs and selling of drugs that's illegal. So it's interesting that a toxicology report could result in actual prosecution.
Yeah, I think so too. And
yeah, that's unusual.
It's terrible. And the toxicology report, in my opinion, should be private.
I completely agree. Yeah, there's a medical privacy issue too.
Yeah.
Isn't that HIPAA laws? Is that what those are?
Yeah, I think you're right. It might be HIPAA.
Yeah, it seems like that actually violates another set of laws. Probably a consideration they didn't make whenever they introduced the. I presume it's some type of mandatory toxicology test being done after a sexual assault is reported.
Yeah, I think that's part of. I'm not sure even why they have to have a toxicology report, but I don't know. The next one is gender identity at work. What they're trying to do is extend the rules of the Don't Say Gay or Trans law to government workplaces and nonprofits. That's just alarming expansion of political control and censorship and infringement on equality. I'm not sure where that one stands right at the moment. Let me see if I can find that.
Yeah, Rita Harris had brought this one up in our interview before. She was talking about them trying to expand this law into the workplace. And I think it's interesting that, free speech is our First Amendment right. And it's weird that they are trying to pass laws that police speech, not only in schools, but now in workplaces and at nonprofit organizations.
You're right.
And governmental. Yeah, it seems like it's not within the spirit of the Constitution, in my opinion.
No, it isn't. I'll tell you a couple of others that are, let me just see if I can bring up the legislative report. So guardianship reform, I told you, was dead until next year. Rape victims' representation during depositions is expected to fail. We want to retain rape kits. Right now, if you aren't going to go through with a prosecution, they destroy your rape kit. The problem is that most people that are most women that are sexually assaulted, it takes them 7 years to come forward. The trauma is so traumatic, and it looks like that one will pass. The Protect Abortion from Criminalization, that failed. Responsible Gun Ownership Act, that of course failed. unsafe exchanges. I forget what that one is. There's so many bills that it's hard. This is great. Don't say gay or trans at work. That failed. The other where they wouldn't let you update your driver's license for your trans gender identity. So you would have to have your birth identity on your driver's license. That didn't come up. No movement on voter suppression. They expect to play. One of the horrible ones is not filming the police. They made real restrictions on how close you can be, what the police can say about filming when they're in the middle of a interaction or whatever. They call it the Don't Film Police bills. It's SB 184 and HB 75. Unfortunately, that's likely to pass.
It seems like there have been enough Supreme Court decisions over the decades that have retained the right that public officials, in the performance of their official duties, are we do have a right to record them, because the information should be public, and it should be it's for a what was their rationale? I think the Supreme Court's rationale was that it was supposed to increase trust, to make sure that they were performing their duties in a proper way, and that they weren't abusing their authority.
Right.
So it seems like some of these laws seem to go up against long-standing federal law.
I think so too. But then it's a matter of somebody taking them to court and then working your way through the courts, which is a forever type of process. I'll tell you a couple of others. The Florida, they're trying to put through this bill that would provide websites on these fake abortion clinics. So
I saw that. I was reading up because Ramon had sent a message with a list of bills that you were hoping would get tracked in the app, and I saw the one about the website creation. But when I was reading the language, it seemed very vague. And on the one hand, depending on how you interpret it, it seems like you could support it. But on the other hand, it seems like, depending on what type of website they're creating, you might not support it. So could you tell me a little bit about what you think they're trying to do with the bill, and why you do support or
they want to promote these religious clinics where you go in, they are not going to count, they say their pregnancy, all kinds of full pregnancy support and full choices, and you go in and you are battered from the moment you walk in the door to the moment you come out to not have an abortion. They read you Bible verses. There's no medical staff on site. There's no HIPAA protection. They're fake abortion clinics, and the state already gave them $26 million for these fake abortion clinics last year. So it's horrific that these sites, these clinics are misleading. They're not clinics. If you don't have medical personnel there, you're not a clinic. So the idea is we want them to vote no on that.
That's interesting. And you bring up a really good point, that if there's no medical staff there and there's no medical professionals, then I think using the word clinic is a little bit misleading. Absolutely.
Right.
Do you think that this also maybe butts up against the concept of separation of church and state? Do you think that that's another
think all
argument?
over the GOP is bucking up against church and state. The problem is they have no issue with that. They want a Christian nationalist country, and they are going for it. So in every single one of these, when you look at abortion, it's absolutely a violation of the separation of church and state. And they don't think there's a problem with that. Like that Alabama judge ruled, and he was quoting how we can't offend God with letting any of the embryos, and an embryo isn't even a fetus, and we're protecting an embryo. I don't think that one will stand because it's such a perverse interpretation. But it's got to go through the courts, which
So
takes forever.
that's an interesting opinion. I think that you're correct. I also don't think that it will stand, but I'm not sure that it's going to not stand for the reasons that I think it shouldn't stand. So I think again, when we butt up against this separation of church and state idea, I think a federal judge or any judge shouldn't be using his religion as a justification to support or oppose laws or uh, decisions.
I totally
But
agree.
I feel like it's probably going to fail more because of the secondary and tertiary implications of the law that are going to cause a multitude of problems that people never even expected. Like, I think one of the things I was thinking about when considering the personhood for embryos thing is, does that mean that a clinic that has 10,000 embryos in a freezer, can they claim 10,000 dependents on their taxes at the end of the year?
I don't know.
I mean, it seems like they're taking care of 10,000 kids if they're kids, right?
I think they would have to because they're paying to keep those embryos, quote, alive. But if you make all of those human beings, then you have to keep paying no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a bizarre ruling from the Alabama court. Something went
Yeah.
wrong. I don't know whether nobody presented the right argument to them or they just ignored it. But it's a terrible ruling.
I agree. I think it seems to be, the decision seems to only consider one aspect of what it meant, and it didn't consider all the implications that the change would have. So there was another one that you had brought up earlier. Oh, you had brought up one about guns that you said had failed.
Yeah, it was a total gun reform bill reversing some of what's been done. And, there are bills that are messaging bills that you're not going to make any headway with in this case, with the Republicans, but you still have to put the bill forward to message people, the public, that you are intent on these things. Another good example of a messaging bill is the right to vote put forth by Geraldine Thomas. Is it Thomas? It's the Voting Rights Act for this session, which was a wonderful act. And they knew that it wouldn't go anywhere, but it had such support of people, but it never got into a committee or anything.
So do you think that this was something that would have had a lot of support from the people and had a lot of majority support, but it was shut down due to like a bureaucratic process or
Not due
something
to a
like that?
bureaucratic process, totally due to a political process of suppressing the vote.
I see. I see. What kind of changes would that law have made?
It would have extended the early voting days. It would have made vote by ballot a lot easier with multiple drop boxes. It would have not allowed voting rolls to be purged. I'm not sure what else was in it, but it corrected almost all of the voter suppression and problems with voting. That because voting in Florida has been pretty great. We have had little or no fraud. So the idea that the Republicans are reducing our fraud by all these voter suppression kinds of things, but they say it's something else, is absurd. We need the Voting Rights Act so that everybody, it should be easy to vote, and it's become harder. We're in the 21st century and it should be a breeze to vote. We should have that's another thing that was in there, a national holiday for voting. Why do people have to take a day off from work when they can't afford to do that? But that gives you an idea.
So I think that's really in the spirit of what we're trying to do. I think we're trying to increase accessibility. We want to make voting easier. We want you to understand what's happening around you and want you to be involved in the change. I think that's and I think that's really one of the larger arcs of this organization is we're trying to get more people involved, and we want to know what people think, and we want people to. I think that it's really easy to be against the government when it feels like you don't have any say in it and everything is being done to you. But if you get to put your word out and you put your opinion out there and you can join your voice with other people, it can feel like something that you're affecting the change. You're making it happen, and so it's easier to accept the changes that are happening around you because you're a part of them.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is we're not that much against government. We think you need government, you need regulation, you need controls that we have lost control of, like the basic monopolies we have in several different industries. What we're against is politicians that are saying things about, are limiting our own say on our bodies, are limiting the access and the ease of voting. It's not so much the government, it's the politicians and how much they take money from groups that drive their votes.
I agree. I think lobbying is a huge issue. I think that there's a bit of a gray area between lobbying and bribing, and it's really hard to determine when you cross that line because the way the laws are written, I think they're a little bit vague and unclear.
Well, Citizens United should never have happened. That was
I agree.
Criminal.
I think Citizens United was a huge blow to democracy itself. And then you hear about the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas and things like that. And I think money has become too much of an influence on people's opinions. I think
absolutely
that our opinions should be based more on our principles and what we believe to be true, and not so much what groups are supporting us and what people are paying us.
Yeah, it's funny because they always say Russia is run by an oligarchy. Now they're a dictatorship and they have a lot of other issues. But I think we're run by an oligarchy too. Oil companies, the big media companies, we aren't that much different from that standpoint. At least we don't have a dictator.
I agree. I think it's an interesting argument because as time goes on, it seems like the influence of money is increasing. And that means that the people who have the most money have the loudest voices and the most effect. And the people who have no access to money basically don't get to participate. And I think that kind of goes against the foundations of what we built ourselves to be. We the Constitution says 1 man, 1 vote. We should all have a say in our destiny.
That's what's so scary. If you look at some of these marginalized groups and communities, they say, why should I vote? Nothing happens, or what I need doesn't come about. The problem is that you have to, for Florida, you're going to have to vote every year for several years to change what's going on, because we need, in my opinion, you need more feminists in office. You need more, and I'm biased, I'm sure, but you need more Democrats in office because they're more. Now, both parties are paid off to a degree, but I do think feminists have principles, like Rita Harris. She has principles that she sticks to, and same thing with Anna Eskamani and Fentress Driscoll and Senator Book. They that principles that they stand with. Look, Tom Keene, our newest Democrat.
Yeah, Tom. Yeah, I remember Tom Keene was running in the primary. Yeah,
Yeah,
and then
and
so
he,
did he win the general?
yes, and
Awesome.
he's a big supporter of the Digital Democracy Project.
He is. He is. He's been a great supporter, and you have as well. Thank you so much. I hear so many stories about Debbie and all the great things that you've done, and connecting us with all the different organizations. And I mean, really, what we want to do is we want to hear from everybody. We want everybody to be involved. We want everybody to have a say in their own destiny. We want everybody to tell the politicians how they want them to vote and what they believe to be true. And we want the politicians to be influenced by their voters and not by the people that are paying them money.
I agree.